Great. So it's 2:04. So we'll get started with our event today. So welcome everyone to our second Ikeda Center virtual dialogue. It's so nice to see some of your faces because I have 13 pages of all of you, so I can't see you all at once. But we're just so happy to have this opportunity, especially at this time, to connect with all of you again, not just here locally in Cambridge, but from all around the world. I see we have participants joining. I had a hard time writing everything down, but we have Mexico, Brazil, Tennessee, South Africa, Germany, Poland, Canada, California, Pennsylvania, Nigeria, just to name a few. So this is really a global community filled with global citizens. So thank you all so much for joining today. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lillian, and I am the program manager here at the Ikeda Center. And I assume that we have some of you joining us for the first time or learning about our center for the first time. So I thought I could share a little background on our center to start out the event today. So the Ikeda Center for Peace, Learning, and Dialogue was founded in 1993. And our mission since then has been to build cultures of peace through learning and dialogue. And so with that, all of our work is aimed at helping to establish a shared global ethic across cultures and religions. An ethic based on respect for the absolute dignity of life itself, a firm belief in the human potential for good and for transforming the world, and a clear recognition of the interdependence of life, of all life. And our founder, Daisaku Ikeda, is a peace builder, writer, educator, and Buddhist leader. And Mr. Ikeda established this center really with the hope that people from all walks of life, all different faiths, ethnicities, races, backgrounds, experiences can come together to engage in open-hearted, open-minded dialogue, which he believes is the surest path to peace. So usually we host events and seminars at our center located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But since the pandemic, we've been striving to create virtual spaces just like this one today, where we can continue to engage in dialogue, especially in these most uncertain and challenging times. So today's event, as you've seen, is titled Asking Questions Together, What is Our Path Forward? And it was inspired by our dialogue with a dear friend of the center, MIT professor Ceasar McDowell, and his new initiative called America's Path Forward. And so this initiative encourages the public, so all of us, to donate our question about the future of America and our personal experiences around that question. And I think some of you joining today have donated your question already, so thank you so much. But if you haven't yet, don't worry, we'll have an opportunity to do that later on in the event. And I will be inviting Ceasar to speak more about the project in just a little bit, so please sit tight for that. But first, I'd like to give an overview of what to expect today. So the main event will be a panel discussion between Ceasar and two of our wonderful student ambassadors, Giulia Pellizzato of Brown University and Anthony Jojola of Boston College, where they will talk about the importance of asking questions at this time and their personal experiences. And they will also be joined by my wonderful colleague, Priandra Noel, who will facilitate the dialogue. And following the panel discussion, we'll break out into small groups where each of us will have the opportunity to share our own questions and our own experiences. Then we'll finish with large group reflections and a wrap up at the end. So needless to say, when we planned this event, we did not know that in the weeks following, events would unfold that would in many ways divide, but also unite our country more than ever. And starting with the senseless killings of George Floyd, and in previous months, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless others, showed us once again the systemic racism that is so deeply rooted in our society, and the complete disregard for Black lives. And then the global outrage that finally erupted as a result of decades of injustices and buried hurt that then took form in thousands and thousands of individuals from all races, ages, social and economic backgrounds, taking to the streets to say enough is enough. During this historic time in our country and the world, I can't help but feel we are at a crossroads where each of us, each of our actions, my actions, right, can determine the future of humanity. Personally, I have actually been grappling with my own feelings of despair, anxiety, hopelessness, frustration, anger, and honestly, some days feeling so paralyzed by the thought that there's nothing I can do to change our society that seems to be filled with so many contradictions, injustices, discrimination, hatred, and the list goes on. But planning for this event and being in conversation with Caesar, our staff, Giulia, and Anthony, and also looking to the founding spirit of our center, I realized that now more than ever, I need to fight against my own feelings of resignation in order to learn, to listen, to dialogue, to ask questions, both to myself and others. And I imagine that all of us are here today too, because we have questions and we have doubts, but we also have hopes, and we want to talk about it, we want to reflect, we want to listen, and we want to be better. So I just want to take this moment to thank all of you for being here today to do this important work together at this time. In a message he sent to the center, Mr. Ikeda shared the following with us. He said, "Our objective must be the realization of peace for all people and to support the harmony and progress of a global civil society. The way to achieve this, I believe, is again through the dialogue of spiritual openness. The key to such dialogue is devoting our very lives to listening and learning from those different from us. This humble willingness to learn is profoundly meaningful, invariably fostering deep empathetic connections. Not only does this resonance enable us to understand others on a deeper level, it acts as a mighty impetus for our true self, our greater self, to flower within us." So Mr. Ikeda is now 92 years old, and throughout his life, he has practiced and enacted this kind of dialogue with thousands of thinkers and world leaders and ordinary citizens, with the conviction that if we dig deep enough within each person's life, we can find there flowing the same underground channels of compassion and empathy. And so for Mr. Ikeda, the inner transformation of each individual is the point to which we must return and from which we must depart anew. And he has said that we must make the human being, human happiness, the consistent focus and goal in all fields of endeavor. So today, we hope to listen together, learn together, and engage in this process of bringing forth our greater selves by reflecting deeply, on the questions that are in our hearts. And though those questions might be difficult or painful to address, because we're asking them together, I really believe that we can find the courage and strength from within to take on this very important challenge of finding a path forward together at this very crucial time. So with all that said, before we officially begin our event today, we actually want to take a few minutes and invite all of you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable, but to take a moment to really reflect on what you're feeling right now at this moment, what questions you might have, and what you'd like to take away from the event today. We know that we all came into this event perhaps grappling with different thoughts, feelings, concerns, emotions. So we want to take this moment to acknowledge, whatever it is that we're going through, so that we can get ready to think about the future together. So we'll take about 2 to 3 minutes. And if you just want to rest your eyes because you've had a long day, that's okay too. But I'll set a timer, and in about 2 to 3 minutes, when time's up, I'll bring everyone back. So we'll get started with our moment of silent reflection. Thank you all. Great. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll come back together in the larger group now. So Henri, if you can stop share screen, that would be great. Great. So thank you so much, everyone. So now that we've taken some time to connect with ourselves and the present moment, we're excited to get our event started today. And just a quick side note, if you have any technical questions, please ask us in the chat and one of our staff members will do their best to respond accordingly. So as I mentioned earlier, we're so fortunate today to have Dr. Ceasar McDowell with us for this event. And so Ceasar is a professor of civic design at MIT and also chair of the Master of City Planning program. So now I'd like to invite Ceasar to share more about America's Path Forward. So I'll turn it over to you, Ceasar.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Since you're all over the world, I guess I can say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's really nice to have everyone here. Before I start talking about America's Path Forward, I want to do one thing as part of this. I want to actually read a selection from a series of conversations between Vincent Harding and Dr. Ikeda that were captured in the book, America Will Be. So hope you give me just a few minutes to read this. Harding says, our creative capacity emerges from telling stories. And I suggest that we are already living inside our own stories, as if we were storied into being. In the same way that food and water are essential to our survival, stories are also essential. Gathering together to tell stories is absolutely necessary for every human society. I maintain that for every country in the world to develop a healthy democracy, we must share our stories, as well as listen carefully to the stories of others. Mr. Ikeda responds, the foundation of mutual understanding that emerges through dialogue is a lifeblood that animates democracy. To develop a close understanding community, we need opportunities for intimate, mutually inspiring dialogue that enables each person to share the story of his life. In a democracy, the people play the leading role. Therefore, democracy flowers from the fertile ground of people who live their own lives believing that my heart is a protagonist in a victorious life. A few years ago, a group of us started what we're calling America's Path Forward. And actually, I was going to share my screen, but I'm not allowed to. The host has to let me. So while I'm waiting for that to happen, I want to just say a little bit about what's going on in this country right now, not just in terms of what's been happening with the immediate issues around police brutality, but what's been going on for a while in our country, right? So one of the things we know about the United States, and it's actually becoming truer and truer across the world, that many of us are living in places where we're living among the most demographically complex set of people who've ever lived together, right? And yet we have this sort of problem that in the places in which we live, we actually don't have the infrastructure or the processes that can actually support that kind of complex public to do what a public needs to do in democracy. Our systems of how we come together, how we think about things that need to happen in our society are all based on a more adversarial model. We figure out what our interest group is. We try to get people to join our interest group. And then we have a kind of a battle between interest groups around power and prejudice and racism and a whole set of things to decide who gets there first and who gets their choice. I actually believe that one of the things we're faced with, and I think it's an evolutionary question, not just for democracy, but for human society, is how do we actually create new structures and new processes that allow us to come together in our full complexity. And America's Path Forward is actually one little simple test, an example of doing that. And it's based on this notion that one thing that we all can do, and it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what language you speak, it doesn't matter how educated you are, is offer up your question in relationship to a thing in your life, things that are happening in your life. And we've used this around all kinds of different, we've done this before around smaller events in different towns, for everything from around having people come together about their questions around domestic violence, to transportation, to issues of identity. But now we think it's actually time to try this at a national level, to get people to actually donate their questions about the future of America. And the way our process works, and I'll just say this really simple, is it's actually pretty simple, is we get people to donate their questions, and then along with their question, tell us the experience in their life that actually got them to that question. And they can do that through text, video, audio, any way they want to. And then you submit that. And then what we do is we actually find people who have similar questions and different experiences, and we invite them into a facilitated conversation with each other. And right now, we're doing all of this on Zoom. And in those facilitated conversations, we have people, again, share the story that brought them to the question. And then we have the group, and these are small conversations of 6 to 7 people, actually figure out how can we reframe or create a question that, if answered, would take into account all of our experiences in actually getting to the answer. And then we're using these as a set of tools to actually help build a new public agenda, really about what's on people's mind about the future of this country. I won't go into it more detail than that now, but that's the general idea of what we're trying to do with America's Path Forward. And we're rolling it out, not as a national campaign blasting something, but by being in small groups that are of people who are already in relationship to do that with themselves. And so Ikeda is one. We're doing another one with a small group in Seattle next week. And we're building national by actually working with small, intimate groups across the country. One last thing I want to say is, when we first started this, we thought, okay, we're going to do this in the US, and then maybe we can do this in other countries. And then we started getting questions from people saying, well, I'm actually from another country. Can I actually donate my question? Because I have a question about the future of America, because it has an impact on our future here. And so we've now just said, okay, it's an open forum. Anyone in the world can offer up their question about what they think is important about the future of America, or the question they have about that. So anyway, I'll let it go with that now. There's a lot more on our website, but that's the kind of impetus and grounding of why we're doing this.
Great. Thank you so much, Caesar. I just want to share, even as staff members, we've all submitted our questions, and even just through that process, we've had such meaningful dialogue in reflecting on the process of us asking questions. So we just really want to say thank you to Caesar for bringing us into this project at this time, and having the opportunity to participate too. So without further ado, we're going to start our panel discussion. And so actually at this time, I'd like to ask if everyone can turn off your cameras so that our panelists can show up at the top, so you can see all of their faces. And it will also help us with connection screen, our connection speed a little bit. But after the panel, we'll invite everyone to come back on. Yes, so now actually, as people shut off their cameras and we get ready, I'm going to turn it over to our program and office assistant, Priyandra, to facilitate the discussion together with Caesar, Giulia, and Anthony. So I'll turn it over to you, Pri.
Thank you, Lillian. I am Priyandra, and I go by Pri for short. And thank you, Caesar, as well, for that wonderful explanation of your website, because I think the launch of this platform is absolutely phenomenal and so timely, because I truly feel that what we really need in the world right now, more than ever, especially in this unprecedented time, are spaces like these where we can really use our voice and share our experiences to, as your website actually beautifully expresses, heal our present, honor the roots of our past, and choose our future. And I'm super encouraged to facilitate this dialogue with you and our two student ambassador panelists. Thank you, Caesar, Giulia, and Anthony. And on that note, I think we're ready to begin. Let's start off with introductions from Giulia and Anthony. Giulia, do you mind going first?
Sure. Hi, hello, pleased to meet you, everyone. My name is Giulia. I'm presently a postdoctoral fellow at Brown University. I moved to the US 1.5 years ago from Switzerland, but I'm actually Italian. I grew up in Italy. And my field of study and research is 20th century literature, women in publishing, and transnational networks of women. And what's most on my mind right now is how to share the excitement and the beauty of reading and learning. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much. And Anthony, may I pass the baton on to you?
Yes. Hi everyone, my name is Anthony Hawala, currently in New Mexico, but I am a graduate student at Boston College. I'm a dual degree student between the Masters of Social Work program and the School of Theology and Ministry. And in social work, my focus is more on mental health. And yeah, those are my areas of study, and glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Anthony. And I think I would love to hear from Ceasar again if you wanted to sprinkle a little more about yourself.
The only little more I'll speak about myself is that I've been a long-time friend at Ikeda Center, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yay, thank you very much, Ceasar, Anthony, Giulia. And, so leading up to this event, we've had a few opportunities to have conversations and engage with the content of this wonderful America's Path Forward website. And so I wanted to ask, what was it like for you, this process of asking questions and using this website as a means to do so? Any reflections you'd like to share with us? The floor is open.
Yeah, I'll start. This was actually a really good process, I found, but it was also more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Like, it seems simple, just ask some questions, but then when you think of a question, you're like, but what about this? And you kind of just go deeper and deeper, and then having the experience tacked onto it really helps with really thinking about, like, where did I come from this? Like, how did I get to this? And then you just kind of go deeper and deeper. And for me, it was a lot of reflection and brought up a lot of things I've been thinking about from, like, my childhood and everything growing up. So it was a really good process, but just a lot more complex than it would seem at first.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think out of all the rabbit holes one can find themselves in, what's so great about this platform is you can see the other questions and it's like, oh, I thought about that and someone also mentioned it. And so it's really empowering to see how your mind can also be reflected in others' experiences as well. And yeah, what about you, Giulia?
I have to say, at first I was a bit intimidated by the webpage, but actually the fact of sitting there and trying to nail down my thoughts on words started a process of inner dialogue, actually. And somehow it was a way in which I myself discovered what I care most about, correcting one word after the other. And definitely the part I appreciated most was being able to navigate and explore the other questions and experiences. It was really enriching and empowering. And I really think it has a great potential. And it actually reminded me of the practice of a social activist and peace builder in Italy, Danilo Dolci, who in the 50s moved to the areas of Western Sicily to support the most disadvantaged and poor communities. And actually, he created this process of reciprocal meieutic, which is basically the same. So getting together, asking questions together, and discussing together. So I really look forward to the continuing of our dialogue.
It was actually interesting to hear, because one of the things I find particularly people struggle with is this notion of actually formulating a question. And I think it's hard for people, not because the act is hard, but because we seldom get asked. And so we're out of practice. And I think it's more an indictment of our kind of system of public dialogue. Normally when we go out to the public, it could be in any way. What we're asking people to do is respond to someone else's question, but we're not curious enough to know what people's questions are that they are showing up with. And I think it's really hard, like in our society. The reason I keep saying our society is not because I think we're exceptional, but it's because it's the one I know the most. So I'm not trying to say anything about anyone else's world. This is the one I kind of like know the most, so I focus on it that way. But what is clear for me is that we actually don't have a way for the public in this country to actually frame what's going on, what's important for it. What we end up doing all the time is letting other people kind of frame the issue, give the public 2 or 3 options to choose from, and then we say that's what the public thinks. But we actually never find out what the public thinks. And when we do something and say, well, this is kind of how the public feels about something, we strip away people's complexity, right? Because soon as if you really ask someone what their question is about something and their experience with it, what you realize is that people have a very complex way of thinking about things. It's not simple, right? And when you bring 4 or 5 or 6 people together who have the same question, you realize how complex something is. And the interesting thing is people can hold that complexity, right? If you create the opportunities for them to have it. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Mr. Ikeda says. This is kind of paraphrasing it, but he talks about how peace is essentially a struggle for words. And I think what's so great about America's Path Forward is we're really being invited to contribute something that we all can with the words and the voice that we all have. And so, yes, and that actually leads me to the next point is we've found out how difficult but also enriching the process of asking questions is. And I was interested, and I think we're all interested in hearing what questions you submitted to the platform and just other thoughts that you might have surrounding that.
Yeah, I'll go again. It actually, the question I'm talking about, sorry, actually for mine is changed in very recently because of just events that came up again. But for mine, that I'll resubmit a different question, which also everyone submit more than one question, feel free. Would be that in all this time with all the different diversity in the world and how everything's so divided and there's different people and there's so much systemic racism, inequalities, discrimination, prejudices, and everyone, like, I guess my overall question was like, why does it have to be like that? But then it was like, how can we change that in people's like minds, hearts, change that mentality that people have on both ends of it, and just to reach a more peaceful and like united kind of world. Because in this country, we everything growing up and stuff, and even talking with other students, I've always heard like it's a United States and everything, like we pride ourselves so much on like united, but then anyone living here, like you can see there's so much division around. So like just how can we work towards more unity with everyone and then throughout the world also?
I gather my courage and share mine too. I will just read it if you don't mind. So yeah, my question is, how can we ensure that each and every youth has access to empowering education, which is centered on the students' potential, aimed at their lifelong happiness and based on their needs? And the experience for me of engaging with other questions, the questions we went on looking at. So for example, there was one about actually racism that is learned at school. Another one pointed out that we grew up in a society that is teaching systematic discrimination. And another question was asked, how can we address and uproot inequalities and discrimination? And yeah, it made me see even more how education is a key moment in all of this. We are so young when we get in school, and we can be labeled or feel labeled even before we know who we are actually. And I love a quote of Dr. Ikeda that says that the teacher is all that stands between the students and the cruel traditional society. For many reasons, teacher or educators cannot stand in there because they themselves are struggling, or because it's so easy to label someone else. And so that made me reflect that in order to become capable of being such an educator, I have to embark first in a shared process of learning. So.
Yeah, both.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Caesar. I got so excited because both actually made me realize how change is constant, and it's as we fully become humans individually, what can we do to contribute to a positive change? And all that makes me also want to hear your question too, Caesar, since you had the inspiration behind all of this. But I want to hear your thought first since I cut you off.
No, that's all right. I was going to ask Julian to say a little bit more about just what in her own experience got her to her question. I was kind of curious what's the pathway that she had that got her there.
Okay. Yeah, I think it all starts from my experience in school. So in my 30s now, it's a long time within school and university. And as a young student in Italy, I was grappling with a school system that prioritized the acquisition of information over the ability to think critically and tackle problems with creativity. And this was particularly true with the teaching of literature. So what could have been an empowering dialogue on burning present issues with men and women of all times and walks of life through books was indeed endless boredom. And I wanted to become myself a person who could bring about a transformation in the teaching of literature. And actually, this is one of the reasons why I moved to the States for carrying out my first research as an independent researcher. And so far, I enjoyed the most stimulating and vibrant human community, but I was also shocked by the distance I saw between the concerns of the university's heads and the needs of the youth at large, the amount of tuition fees and the structure of the job market, and also like the pressure and the anxiety that's in crushing, especially the youth. So all of this made me question actually university as a structure and question the value of my own job. Because I believe that art and culture should be a shared heritage of all people and all the peoples, and not a prerogative of the few or a decoration. I believe they should be a means at everyone's disposal for solving complex problems with creativity, so that we can display our humanity. Yeah, but I'm not sure I'm on the track of that. So
Thank you for sharing that. What I love about it is that it kind of illustrates what I was saying a little bit before about the complexity we hold when we raise a question. There's a lot behind it, right? If we allow ourselves to reflect, right, and understand why is this question coming up for us and what's in it. And what's hard for us in the society so much is that because we don't do that, we think there's simple answers, right? We keep thinking, oh, there's a simple answer to this, and then we're never satisfied with what comes out, nor should we be, because it's always inadequate, because it's not taking into account all that we need to take into account. Which gets me to something else that I'll talk about later. Priya, you asked me something? I'm sorry.
I know it's all right. I just wanted to hear what your question was, since you were a part of the inspiration of making a platform where people can really, contribute a question and go through that process.
So this is really interesting. So there's a question that I had when we did one of these earlier versions of the question campaign a long time ago. And I found myself in a conversation with someone else. And I actually liked their framing of the question better. It's the same question, right? The way I answered it was kind of clumsy. They were very clear. So I want to use it, the kind of re-edited version of my question. And the question was, why is it, as a Black man in America, I have hope and love for a country that has mistreated me and my people so bad for so long? And for me, that question, the experience in that really has to do with how just the complexity of what it means to be in a place and realizing that there are good things about it, there are bad things about it. There's a positionality of hope within it. It, you know, I think it speaks, that question just speaks volumes to my own kind of, I keep using this word complexity, so I'm going to stop using it. But all the things within me that I struggle with, right? So at one point in time, you know, I mean, I've had instances with police or other people where, you know, hatred has just been, you know, aimed at me for no reason other than the color of my skin. At the same time, I've had people who clearly acknowledge the color of my skin, the experience of me and people like me who have embraced me as a human being. They've been able to do both at the same time, right? And at the same time, I've had a foundation in a religious tradition that was all embedded in our culture as Black people, right? Which was a holding place about having hope in the midst of being unseen, right? And how to do that. So I guess for me is, and I didn't realize the contrast of this so much until, you know, I started talking with other people in other places, and particularly other Black people who were in places where they were not the majority, and the extent to which they may not have been as free to live and express and have places that held all those different contradictions. And so that maybe one of the special places, and one of the things that gave me hope about this place, is that all those contradictions were evident. And I think this became really clear to me. What does it mean for that? And this is going to sound really weird when I say this, but 6 years ago, I was in Istanbul, 7 years ago. It's actually where I met my wife. And my wife is Black, and she's from Istanbul, grew up there, been there for, her family came there as part of the slave trade during the Ottoman Empire. And I remember walking through Istanbul and thinking, there's a physicality of this place that represents the same kind of complexity that I see in America, because the physicality in Istanbul is about tradition and modernity in a battle with each other, right? And the ways you could see it and what was happening physically on the streets. And I'll give you one little example. I was walking down this one street, and on one side of the street, there were police with a water cannon, right, ready to go do whatever they were going to do. On the other side of the street was a museum in which people were lined up to go and that was actually looking at the kind of issues of diversity and art around diversity within the context of the history of Turkey. And on another corner, I mean, it's really, you could just see all of this, was a gathering of people who were fighting for trans rights. And then at the other corner was a mosque, right? That's like, that level of physicality and complexity is in some sense, I think, what exists in this country in some way, not so much in this physical way, because we separate ourselves physically, but in our ideological ways and the ways of what things we're trying to struggle with. And that I still believe it's possible, it is possible here to actually make progress on that struggle. So that's my experience about why I have that question. I don't have any answer to it. And I may be totally wrong.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's, I mean, complexity is a word that comes up a lot because it is very complex, everything. And, you know, as you were speaking, I was thinking too that in just the personal conversations I've had with Anthony, yeah, complexity, when that word came up, I was like, oh, Anthony, I'm sure has a lot of experiences around just, yeah, the complexity of, you know, the identity that you have or the experiences that you have. So I was wondering, in the last maybe 4 minutes or so of this great conversation, if you wanted to share something, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. That actually goes with my question too, with the complexity and then identity and having the conversations with you, Pri, and many other people. But for anyone that doesn't know, I'm half Black, half Native American, so that makes that nice little, it's fun and everything for me and everything. But it goes with my question of like, how can we change people's hearts and minds and mentalities? Because growing up, well, this all started with my little brother's birthday, but when he was, grandfather was praying for him because his grandfather's Native. But in the thing, it was just talking about like how he can praise that he'll succeed in the world and everything. But there's that thing of they want him to know his Native side and be traditional and stuff, but also to be able to grow up in like the Anglo world, the white world, to be able to succeed that way. But that having that duality is very difficult, because for me, I'm not very traditional. I know some stuff, but not a lot. I chose getting an education because that's just how the mentality was. Like, you need to go to school, you need to learn all this stuff so you can succeed in the world out there and everything, because that's going to be different. But then growing up around Natives and having that be like the main identity you have for yourself, but then just having the other side of just like looks and everything, like I don't look Native, like not very. And then just going like back to my old hometown and then being in a store and then having a person behind me in line just say, you don't belong here. It's because I look different, but it's somewhere where I grew up through elementary and everything. And just having that complexity of like not knowing and trying to, I guess, like toe the line everywhere and like try to, you can't fit in everywhere. Or if you identify with something, you might not be accepted in it fully, kind of thing. And that's kind of where I just like come with mine, because there's all the systemic racism and everything. Everyone thinks of it as like just going against Black people or like people of color and stuff, but then it's also in communities of color too, because growing up in a Native community but being seen as Black and stuff, and just having that like mentality of just like growing up having to be, I guess, like wary, cautious kind of thing, and just towing the line and all that, and seeing all these other questions with race and having the mentalities changing, how the colonial past and how we can become united. Just, it's very encouraging, but it's also it just shows that there's a lot that still needs to be done, but there's just so much complexity. I know we go back to the word a lot, but it's very complex.
Yeah, and I think the hope that I see in it is that it's a great source of creative energy too, if we can really find people to have these kinds of conversations with. And yeah, there's a lot to look forward to if we can really unite with this vision of really using the power of dialogue to create this surest path of peace. But I'm sure we could talk about this for hours on end, maybe write many books about it, but we did want to open up the floor for a question, just maybe one question to the panel from the audience, just to also be mindful of the time. So if you do have a question that you would like to ask our wonderful panelists, from Ceasar, Giulia to Anthony, yes, we have time for one question. And if you could just use the raise hand function, your hand will go up and I will pick from there. Let's see. And the raise hand function, I believe, is somewhere on the bottom of your screen. Robin Tish raised her hand. Okay, let me find you, Robin, so I can unmute you or ask to unmute you. All right, you should have gotten a notification from me.
Okay, let me shut my little window here. Shall I put my video on so you can see my face?
That would be lovely.
Hi, everybody. It's very great to be part of this and to see you and to hear you. And I have a question maybe for Ceasar in particular. quickly. Do you know of, I was thinking about this as all of you were speaking, and I was thinking about experiences I had in schools growing up in New York City, a big melting pot, of course. And I was wondering if you are seeing anything worked on by educators at the grassroots level in elementary schools or middle schools in order to make anti-racism and humanistic exchanges in the classroom, dialogue, training, even at the very young level, you know, elementary school kid ages. Are you seeing anything like that from educators, or any ideas coming from educators now who you've been in contact with or you've seen? Because I think it would start there and probably would take a few generations of people to get this going.
Yeah,
Was I clear?
you were very clear, and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to try to answer that, but I will also ask everyone else who's on the call that may have an examples to put it in the chat, and that way we will have more than just my small little experience on this. So, but the answer is yes. So there are lots of things going on. I mean, I know some stuff over in Oakland, even some stuff in Boston where people are doing circles with elementary kids. They're doing meditation and reflection processes in the restorative justice work. So I think it is happening, but it happens in isolated blocks. It's not like, it's because some teacher, sometimes a principal believes it's something that should be done, does it. There are organizations who are focused on doing that. There's Embrace Race, which is working at the elementary, middle school. Someone actually just put in also, there's the Teaching Tolerance. So I think there are a lot of efforts going on. But I think underneath your question is, what does it take to not have those things be at the margins of what education is, but how we move them to the center of what we think it means to actually educate someone. And that's a different question. That's the political question we're faced with, that yes, it will take time for us to get there, but I think we get there by changing the way we talk about our public processes very differently than we do now. I think I've been asked to actually move us on to the next part of this. And so I'm going to share my screen real quick, because what we'd like you to do, some of you have already gone onto the site and have done this, but we're going to give you an opportunity right now to actually do this here. And what we are going to ask you to do is, oops, I just took it away and I wanted it to be here. Is we actually like you to take an opportunity to donate your question about the future of America. And the way you can do this, actually there's a mistake on this slide. I see it already. But all you have to do is go to the chat, right, and actually put your question in there. But what we'd like you to do is take a minute or two, just think about it for a while, and then go ahead and put in the question that you might have about the future of America. I will put in the link to the site just in case you want to do it there, but we are prepared, someone's already done that, Kevin's already done that, to actually have you do it in the chat also. We will collect those up and put them on the site. So whichever one is easiest for you. But to get you started on that, I want to read something from Michael Bridge, which I think is a really good setup for this. Michael says, America is not people who fly their flags out in the open. It is people who answer questions out in the open. America is a conversation that transforms around a whole set of questions that are not easily asked. So that it takes courage and the commitment of many lives to answer them properly and ask them well. May the courage of our questions make us sane. And so with that, I give you a few minutes until Pri calls us back together. I think what's going to happen next is after you submit your questions, we are actually going to, in about 4 minutes, 3 minutes or 4 minutes, put you in the breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, we're going to have you actually share your questions, talk about the experiences that actually led you to that question. And I think we have some more instructions about that too, right, Pri?
Correct. I think, yes, we'll use maybe 3 minutes for this part for everyone to, yes, think about their question.
And put it in the chat.
And put it in the chat. Yes, very important step. And yes, just to clarify, if everyone wouldn't mind using this moment to just post your questions in the chat so that we can see them all clearly. And then we could post other cool resources and stuff afterwards. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Please keep them coming. Maybe about 1 more minute. And as people finish typing up their questions, I do want to give a shout out to our awesome behind the scenes crew. Wouldn't be the meeting that it is without you all. So thank you. And thank you for your questions. This is great. This is so encouraging just seeing this. And it's just the beginning of the event. All right, so please submit your final clicks, but we'll be moving on to the next portion. So I'll pass the MC mic back to our awesome MC, Lillian.
Great. Thank you so much, Pri, taking back the MC mic. And I just want to really thank again our wonderful panelists together with Pri for sharing their stories with us. I think it's really hard to convey, everything in 20 minutes, but they did so beautifully, and also I think really set the stage for our next activity, just as Pri shared. So I'm sure now that you've heard from our panelists and maybe submitted your question, if not yet, maybe you're still formulating it. That's okay. But I'm sure everyone's excited to have their own dialogues at this point. So we're going to break out into small groups for I think about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, but we'd like to invite you to discuss the following questions, which Henri is putting up on the screen right now. So first, and so afterwards we'll have some time for reflections with the larger group. But in your breakout groups, first we'd like you to just share your name and where you're joining us from. And then to share the question that you submitted and your experience around that question with your group. And then once you've had the opportunity to introduce your questions and experiences, to have a discussion around maybe what is resonating with you most in terms of each other's questions and experiences. So you can take maybe a photo of these questions, but we'll also post it in the chat right now, so you will be able to still see them once you enter your breakout rooms. Yes, because we have a short amount of time, we just want to ask everyone to just be mindful of how much time you take when you're sharing, so that everyone has an opportunity to participate. And then if you have any questions in your breakout rooms, there's actually a request help button that you can press, and then one of our staff members can enter your breakout room to help you out. So yes, without further ado, our staff members are going to send us into our groups right now. So please enjoy. Great. Oh, we're all back. Everyone's beautiful faces. Thank you all so much. We'll just give a couple more seconds for everyone to get back into the main room. How are your discussions? Good. Maybe you want more? I wish we could all
more time.
Yeah, that's always the struggle, right? We always want more time to talk to each other. But that's great, because in my group, we were saying that one thing we can do right now is to not let the conversation stop, and to continue to engage wherever we go. So yes, let's continue to do that. So as we wait for everyone to join back in, I just want to be mindful of time. So because we are a little over time, I just want to let everyone know we're going to probably go about 5 minutes over 3:30. So for those who need to leave, please don't worry. But for those who can stay past 3:30, that would be wonderful. But we do want to have just a couple minutes. We have a wrap up at the end, a very exciting wrap up at the end. But I do want to take a few minutes, just to maybe take one or two reflections from anyone, from your discussions in your small groups. So if you would like to share anything you all discuss, again, if you can use the raise hand function, and I'll find you and unmute. And so I think maybe we'll have time for maybe 2 participants. So let me just see my participant list. Okay. So we have Mari. So Mari, I'll start with you, and then I think Ivan. So Mari, I'm going to unmute you. Great. And then,
Oh.
Go ahead, Mari.
Oh, okay. I'll keep it really short, but I think it was interesting because in my group, I had 2 people, Gary and Chris, and I think we all sort of related on the fact that we have privileged backgrounds, because Gary and I are people of color, and Chris is white, but Gary and I had like an interesting experience of being people of color, but also having a lot of privilege, actually, and feeling like, do we, even though we are people of color, because we haven't really experienced it, when we see flyers or posts about like, we need to do more, we need to change, like, and obviously Chris as well, like, we feel like, oh my God, like, what can we do? What can we do? Like, should we even speak? Like, kind of feeling like really like speechless, like, should we even do anything? Is that even going to be harmful? But I think that was a confirmation of recent thoughts that I've had about, well, A, no one's perfect, and B, everyone has a right to speak. And as long as like our intentions are there, and we know our space, like we know ourselves, right? So if we feel like we have these tendencies, these racial tendencies, or if we feel like we don't have these racial tendencies, we know that within ourselves. So that was like, oh, like I'm not alone, and B, I should just keep peeling and keep reflecting and accepting what's happening, and then acting effectively. So that was really nice. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mari, for sharing. Yeah, I think these spaces, today more than ever, I think I so appreciate us having this conversation here. I think when it comes to these kind of conversations, it's it's difficult, right? And it's so easy to just stay silent in fear of maybe saying the wrong thing or not knowing enough. But I think seeing everything that's happening in the world and just seeing all of you here joining today, I feel like more than ever I have to, like you are, Mari, challenge myself to just speak up and share and have the courage to make mistakes, but also to listen. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Mari. So we have maybe 2 more minutes, and I think I was gonna call on Ivan. So Ivan, I think you're maybe unmuted already, if you wanna share.
Thanks, Lillian. Thank you. Yeah, actually I had an interesting experience. We had just an amazing group, just a small group, maybe 4 or 5 people. And just the one concept of privilege, we could have gone on probably hours, about that one thing, And so I was really impressed by, how much dialogue is really needed, how much exchange of ideas, for example, I really didn't even get to share my perspective of privilege, and so it's interesting because it's something that's perceived, internally, and it can be perceived externally, but at the same time, like for example, I am Black, but I'm not really Black. And I'm Latin, but I'm not really Latino. I'm indigenous, but not really indigenous, I'm American, but not really American. I'm Dominican, but not really Dominican, and I can say probably 100% I'm human, but now that's up for debate of, what is human? So, so the point is though, is that I don't, I've never really looked at it as a perspective of privilege, so, for example, because of my dark skin, I may seem, somehow underprivileged, but then my father was the Secretary of State, my grandfather was the governor, so it's like one of those things that it's the perception that's really interesting to me. So we gotta really, have more dialogue across the board, Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Ivan, or if it's Yvonne, I'm so sorry.
Yvonne, that's right.
Yes, I corrected myself. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think what you shared just reminded me again of what Caesar read in the beginning about the importance of sharing our stories and hearing each other's stories. Because yeah, even if whether we look the same or different, we all have different stories, right? So without hearing those stories, we're not able to fully understand everything about the other person. So I wish I had more time. We had more time to hear from everyone, but we are at 3:30. And so I just wanted to thank everyone for such a wonderful discussion. And so to actually wrap up today, we also have our executive advisor, Jason Gula, joining us from Chicago. And so for those of you who are meeting Jason for the first time, he is also professor of bilingual bicultural education and director of the Institute for Daisaku Ikeda Studies and Education at DePaul University. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason to share closing words. So Jason, wherever you are, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, I'm here in Chicago. It's so good to see everybody. And if I can be completely honest, I don't know what to say. I'm feeling like I just want to listen and hear from others. But I was asked by Lillian, and when Lillian asks me to do anything, I always say yes, and then I worry about how I'm going to do that. I'm so honored to be in the same event. I want to thank Giulia and Anthony and Lillian and Pri for organizing and coordinating and speaking. And of course, Caesar. Caesar's a dear friend of the Ikeda Center. He's become a great friend for the Institute for Daisaku Ikeda Studies, and is a beautiful human being. And I want to thank all of you for joining. Maybe a couple things I can share specifically from Daisaku Ikeda, who founded the institute that is sponsoring this event. But before I do, I'll go back to how Caesar began. And this is from Caesar's chapter in a book that the Ikeda Center produced recently called Peace Building Through Dialogue. And if you don't have it, I would encourage you to get it and read Caesar's chapter. It's really wonderful about how do we support people. If we support people at society's margins, then we are supporting everyone. And it's a really compelling way of articulating it. But Caesar talks about the idea of diversity and this demographic complexity that he spoke about at the beginning. And he says, most people refer to this change as increased diversity. But diversity is, at its roots, about separation and distinction, and is often accompanied by value judgments, both positive and negative. Demographic complexity speaks to the interconnection among people, even in the face of differences. I keep going back to this. I think it's a really moving way of thinking about it, an important way of thinking about it. Daisaku Ikeda came to the United States in 1960. He was just 32 years old, the same age as many people protesting on the streets of the United States. And I think he came with this youthful spirit, looking at America in the title of the dialogue with Vincent Harding that Caesar started, thinking America will be. If this place can overcome the attachments to distinction that subjugate some human beings, then it can be a compass really for the world because of its diversity, if it begins to look at it as demographic complexity, right? And so I think that that's a really important way of thinking about it. So I want to read from you some things that Daisaku Ikeda writes in thinking about that time in 1960 when he was here, and then end with what he shares from a lecture he gave at Harvard about how to move forward. So he says, excuse me, page 153. He says, the concept of humankind itself encompasses great diversity. There are many different races, ethnic groups, languages, cultures, and nationalities. Also, just as no two people look exactly alike, each person differs in terms of birth, occupation, position, way of thinking, and personal preferences. Human society, or what Buddhism terms the realm of existence, is built upon this kind of diversity or demographic complexity. And then he says, beyond distinctions of race and ethnicity, all human beings are equal. This was the spirit of America expressed in its Declaration of Independence. Nevertheless, the sense of superiority and fear many white Americans felt toward African Americans would not permit genuine equality. He said the question boiled down to how to change people's hearts and minds. And he is a Buddhist philosopher and a Buddhist peace builder. Sorry, you can maybe hear the sirens outside my home. So he crosses these semantic boundaries between the religious and the mundane. So I'm going to just read his work here. He says, the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin teaches the inherent dignity and equality of all human beings, deeming all people to be children of the Buddha and what the Lotus Sutra terms treasure towers. If you don't know about this amazing story within the Lotus Sutra of life itself is this magnificent tower that emerges from the earth. It's encrusted in jewels, but you should read about that. He realized that it would be vital to establish in each person's heart the profound view of the human being espoused by the Daishonin. There was no other solution to the human problem, to the problem of racial discrimination, than realizing that human revolution in each individual, this inner transformation. In other words, an inner reformation in the depths of people's lives to transform the egoism that justifies the subjugation of others and replace it with a humanism that strives for coexistence among all peoples. Then he says this, which I think is really key. One of the fundamental tenets of Buddhism is that of dependent origination. All phenomena, so all phenomena, my life, your life, all of the natural world, arise from mutually interdependent relationships of various causes and conditions. In other words, for Ikeda, Buddhism teaches that nothing can exist entirely on its own, in complete isolation. All things are mutually dependent upon and influence one another. So the moment that we think the self is somehow different from the quote-unquote other, we're missing it. The self is based on the other, and the other is based on the self in this dependent origination, this relationship of an interdependent totality that none of us can escape, that all of us are a part of. And so we have to embrace the other fully in their own terms, as Sarah Wider, who's also on this call and engaged in a dialogue with Daisaku Ikeda, says, to address the complex human being who stands right in front of us. That's the important thing. And Sarah says that is what Daisaku Ikeda has this almost uncanny ability to do, no matter who he's talking to. And so I'll end with just a couple of things. He says that this is the way he views the global citizen. I saw someone mention it in the chat. In the early 1960s, shortly after he came to the United States and right before the 1968 riots, he writes, all the world's peoples are one people, and that the various peoples who inhabit the same planet must overcome any discriminatory consciousness and feelings of hostility that arise from difference in borders, language, customs, and living environment. We must awaken to the reality that we form a community bound by a common destiny and live in harmonious coexistence. This he calls global citizenship, and he views it as the means to transcend all kinds of discrimination. So what does this mean for us? And this is where I'll end. He says, excuse me, I'm just looking through my documents here. In his Harvard lecture, it's one of his most enduring speeches, he opens it with encouragement for us to fully understand death, life and death, as a means of appreciating and fully living life. And I wanted to say that because we see these two things really convulsing the nation, COVID-19 and systemic violence against Black and brown bodies. And then Daisaku Ikeda moves onto the main theme of dialogue, the restoration of humanity and the interrelationship of all things that I just mentioned. Specifically, he cites Shakyamuni as an exemplar of the power of dialogue in times of division. Ikeda says, the following quote from Shakyamuni is illustrative. I perceive a single invisible arrow piercing the hearts of the people. The arrow symbolizes a prejudicial mindset, an unreasoning emphasis on individual differences. The invisible arrow of evil is not to be found in the existence of other races and classes external to ourselves, but is embedded in our own hearts. The conquest of our own prejudicial thinking, our own attachment to difference, is the necessary precondition for open dialogue, creative dialogue. Such discussion, in turn, is essential for the establishment of peace and universal respect for human rights. So I think what we're doing in this session, virtually, in distance, me from Chicago, and my dialogue partners, Al Josie was in Atlanta, and Janet's in California, and Shelley is in Jersey City. We're all able to come together through this virtual space to do this kind of dialogue, creative dialogue, where human revolution is the product, where the self is the other and the other is the self, is really the only true way to begin to break down these kinds of attachments to distinction and view ourselves as human beings while we grapple with the necessary work of breaking down systemic violence, systemic racism, and those sorts of things. So I'll end there in the interest of time. And I want to thank all of you and wish you the very best. It looks like hopefully COVID-19 doesn't spike, but that's what they're suggesting. And in the midst of everything else, I want to encourage you to please take care of yourselves and everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay, for so beautifully wrapping up our event, and thank you for always joyfully taking on whatever we ask of you. So thank you so much, Jay, and really, I think leaving us with even more to think about after our event today. And so, yeah, you know, with all of our Ikeda Center events, you know, we really want everyone to feel inspired beyond the event itself. To continue these conversations. So I hope we can all do that after our Zoom meeting today. And so I just wanted to end with actually a few announcements, if that's okay. So first of all is, as actually Jay gave a shout out to Sarah Wider, who's professor of English at Colgate University. And actually in July, we'll be having a virtual dialogue with Sarah. So please stay tuned for the date and topic, which we'll announce soon. And then actually, so as Caesar mentioned earlier, you know, all the questions that you submitted, you know, were posted onto the, uploaded onto the America's Path Forward website. And so actually what you can do, and what we would really like to encourage you to do, is to visit the America's Path Forward website if you haven't yet. And if you create an account, actually you'll be able to find your question there, and then you can include the experience around that question, which you know, you probably discussed a little bit in your small groups, but you can add to that. And so Caesar, did you want to say anything at this point? I wanted to give you another opportunity to say anything about APS before we wrap up.
No, except for that it was amazing to see all the questions coming in. And if you didn't get a chance before the chat goes out, you can still throw it in there or go to the website. I think you all have it now. And I do want to say, maybe in about a week or so, we're going through these questions, and we're going to be looking for similar questions, and then being able to invite people who have similar questions into smaller conversations.
Great, thank you so much, Caesar. And yeah, we look forward to seeing everyone's questions on the website. So usually at the end of our events, I know it's hard with Zoom, but we usually try to take a few screenshots of Zoom so that we can capture everyone's beautiful faces. And so if you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. You can shut off your camera at this time. But I'm gonna take a couple of screenshots, and please bear with me. I know this is the most maybe annoying part about Zoom is I have about, let's see, I have 5 pages of you guys, so I'm gonna have to take 5 screenshots to make sure everyone's captured. So if we can all smile 5 times beautifully widely, that would be great. So I'm just gonna count to 3 each time. So okay, so the first time, all right, 1, 2, 3, peace. Okay, all right, that's 1. Okay, so one more time, 1, 2, 3, peace. Okay. All right, one more. 1, 2, 3, peace. Okay, 2 more, I promise. 1, 2, 3, peace. All right, last one. Okay, 1, 2, 3, peace. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Please stay safe, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Stay well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.